Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. A warm welcome and thank you for joining today's Indian Lawyers Association webinar on budget. My name is Madhura and I represent Indian Lawyers Association, ILA, which is a network of lawyers and all legal practitioners of India. And we are here to provide a platform or a network to those interested to join us and work for educating, mentoring, and bringing about discussions on different topics. We work on the model of having local chapters. So we have about 70 plus of them across India, and they all add a lot of local flavor to ILA and its operations. So we'll be very happy to invite and involve all of you in the next initiatives of ILA. For now, I'll hand this to Mr. Gagan Kumar, who is president of ILA and settler at Krishnomics based in Delhi, who will also moderate and speak at today's event. Gagan sir, over to you.
Thanks, Madhura, and a very warm welcome to all the participants who have joined us online, and a special thanks to all our panelists who will be sparing their thoughts on the Diwali for the tax professionals, which is Budget Day. And this is one day which we keenly look forward to for various reasons. As we know that the budget document lays down the roadmap for the next 1 year, and considering the ambulatory nature of economy, the tax laws are modified every year through this exercise. And one of the major aspect of the fiscal uh, laws is the amendment in tax laws. And to discuss these issues, we have an illustrious panel today. Knowledge of the subject. We also have with us
Sir, I think you are in bad
Mr.
network.
Sandeep Chilas and can speak on GST. And I am crossing a bad network patch. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I'll try and keep my address short so that all of you who are in good network can speak, and maybe I'll be able to touch in as and when possible. We also have with us Mr. Vishwajit Dubey. He's again a renowned litigator on the commercial and arbitration side. Welcome all of you. So my first question to Dakshaji, to you. We often have this अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ बजट के बजट आया तो कुछ सस्ता होगा कुछ महंगा होगा हमें आम आदमी के लिए क्या है और व्हाट इज इन देयर फॉर द रिच पीपल let me put this question differently because we are a lawyers organization. What is in it for the lawyers in this budget from an income tax standpoint of view? You're on mute, Dakshaji.
Thank you, Gagan. Interesting question. Before I start to answer that, let me just first give my thought regarding the event budget itself. One of the things that has always kind of perplexed me is that why is the budget such an important event for tax professionals? I believe the reason is that the budget sort of sets out the targets of what the government wants to do in the next year, and what are the schemes that it wants to roll out, what are the items on which it is going to spend, and all of that. So it's kind of coming from the other end. So because the government puts out what it wants to spend, it also needs to show where it's going to get the money from. And government gets money from a number of sources, but one of the major sources for the government to get the money is obviously tax revenues, and both direct tax and indirect tax. Now, and that is one of the reasons why it is very important to know whether the tax revenues in the year which is just about to finish have been kind of keeping track with what the budget estimates in the previous year were or not. And if they were, what are the expectations for the next year? Will they keep in tandem? Will they keep on increasing? If there is an increase, will they keep on increasing at the same pace and in the manner to till the quantum that the government needs for the purposes of its spending, and thereby reduce the budget deficit. Now, it is not usually possible for the government to put all the additional taxes that it requires for the purposes of bridging the gap between the expenses and the revenue. And that is the reason why we have a lot of disinvestments and a lot of other resources that the government has at its disposal. But as I said, already mentioned, taxes are one of the major resources. Now, one of the other things that the government also wants to do is to ensure that whatever are the provisions in taxation laws are being interpreted and applied by the taxpayers and are being upheld by the courts in the manner that they intended to bring them into the taxation statutes. A lot of times, despite every good effort, the language in the statute leaves room for interpretation. And this is where the lawyers come in. When we say there is room for interpretation, who makes the interpretation? It is the lawyers and the judges who are also lawyers. So it's the lawyers who make the interpretation. Now, it also depends on the lawyer's skill to convince the judge that his or her interpretation is the correct interpretation and is what was intended by the legislature when that particular provision of law was drafted. So that is one of the kind of a situation which leads to litigations. And now the government machinery constantly strives to try to see to it that all the decisions which are against the revenue department are kind of rectified by making changes to the provisions which were intended to their mind should have been interpreted to bring them revenue, but the courts held that no, you can't have that revenue because that is not the interpretation of law. So same thing has continued to happen even in this provision, in this budget. What I noticed is that there are so many provisions, so many changes, small changes which have been brought into this this finance bill through the budget are provisions or interpretations which the taxpayers put. They may not even have gone to the courts for seeing whether or not they are accurate provisions or not, but they have seen that the taxpayers are using or interpreting them in that regard. One of the very major anomaly or interpretation that I would say is, for example, it was in section 9.1, it was already in 2019, it was already included that if a non-resident receives a gift from a resident person, then that is income which has accrued and arisen in India, and therefore it is taxable in the hands of the non-resident. Now, for some reason, some resident but not ordinarily resident people took the interpretation that since the word used is non-resident, we are out of that provision. Now this in itself, that interpretation is a little bit stretched interpretation. And the reason is, how is an not ordinarily resident person taxed in India? That person is taxed on income which accrues or arises in India, and income which also accrues and arises outside India from a business which is controlled from India, or a profession which is set up in India. Therefore, it is only purely foreign source income which is not taxable in his hand. Now, when a resident is making a payment, whether it is gift or whatever it is interesting that people interpreted that not to be an Indian source payment. It is an Indian source payment. So it should not, it is a stretched interpretation that not ordinarily resident were not to be taxable. And therefore, this provision has to be brought in to say even not ordinarily resident people are taxable when a gift is made like this. Now, again, there is an interpretational issue. People will ask, does it mean that if an Indian resident is making a gift to son or relative, does it mean that even that is covered? There is no change in that, but then again, interpretation will apply. Similarly, under section 57 to, 56 to 7b, where they have removed the word resident for the purposes of giving when share premium that is paid by an investor is more than the fair market value justified by the shares of a closely held company, the difference between the consideration, the premium paid or the consideration paid to the company and the fair market value is taxed in the hands of the company. It was limited to residents. Only residents were, only if the money was received from resident, it was considered taxable. And then there were exemptions, and the exemptions were if the funds were received, if the investment were received from venture capital,
Yes, so,
etc.
Yeah, so I'll stop you here for a minute. I have a follow-up question on this.
Yeah, all right.
This expansion in the definition of section 56 to 7b to include non-resident also. The earlier understanding was that the startups receive money from foreign venture capitalists, and it is only the entry providers in India who are, in order to launder their money using the share premium route, and therefore only residents were covered. Do you think that this further expansion of the scope to include non-resident in 5627B in any manner be detrimental to the fundraising exercise by these startups?
I would answer it as yes and no. I would answer it as yes, in as much as if any individual, any company, etc., are investing directly in a startup from outside India, then in that for that investment, this provision will apply, and the amount that they can pay as premium will be restricted. Otherwise, the company receiving the premium is going to be taxed on the difference between the fair market value and the amount which is being received by them. I say no because only to the extent that if the funding is coming or investment is coming through venture capital funds or AIFs, category 1, 2, 3 AIFs, which are situated in IFSC, then there is no this provision is not getting attracted. So what it seems is that the government would like to promote this kind of investment when it comes from outside India to come through IFSC, because then it is considered still coming from outside India, but it is coming through venture capital funds which are registered with SEBI in India. So it's kind of a situation where one can see the kind of long-term strategy that the government is putting out, and that strategy is being made to be realized through these tax provisions, so that those direct funds don't come without being penalized, for the purpose that there is a possibility for individual investments to come from outside India, which has come through unaccounted money. That possibility continues to remain. And since the original intention to bring in this provision was to curb that kind of money being converted into accounted money, it would seem unfair that it is applied only to residents and not applied to non-residents. From that equity perspective or level playing field perspective, it seems fine. But yes, it does create a problem for the startups to receive funding for more than what their fair market value in terms of the normal provisions of determining fair market value are. Now, here's one thing that I would like to connect, which has been brought into this finance bill itself, the intangible assets. What are the intangible assets? And how do you value them? I'm not going to go into it because you'll probably have a later question on that. But at least I want to point out that will the employees of a startup or of a target which is getting acquired consist intangible assets? Because a lot of times when a valuation is done, a lot of value, lot of importance is placed on the core of those employees, the abilities and skill set of those employees. How do you value them when you want to do the fair market value of the shares of startups? So yes, there is a lot of and a lot of work for valuers and for lawyers.
So you basically answered my question that there's a lot of good things for lawyers who will remain busy for the next 1 year as well.
There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So let me now come to Sandeep. And Sandeep, I have a similar question for you. Expenditure on CSR has been a contentious issue. And in income tax, it is specifically disallowed.
Right.
And there was a view from a GST perspective that the input credit on CSR can be claimed.
Right. So, as you rightly said, that insofar as income tax position was concerned, there was a clarity with respect to whether such expenses are deductible. Logan sir, we lost you in between, and I think.
No, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Sorry. So, as I was saying, insofar as the income tax laws are concerned, there was some bit of clarity with respect to whether these expenses can be deducted or not. But under the GST laws, and as Laksha ma'am was saying earlier, lawyers have always tried to find out a way which is helpful for the client. And in the context of CSR expenses also, there was this position that was being taken that because anything which is done in course or furtherance of business is eligible for input tax credit, CSR activities which were being done as a mandatory requirement were duly in course of furtherance of the business, and therefore any GST paid on such CSR activities would be eligible for input tax credit. Now government has obviously kept that loophole and specifically made an amendment which says that any input tax credit which is pertaining to goods or services which are intended to be used in CSR activities would not be eligible for ITC. So to that extent, that dispute now does not remain. The question now that would arise is that this amendment is not a retrospective amendment. This is a prospective amendment. So what happens with respect to the period when this amendment did not exist, and therefore the dispute would continue with respect to that period at least.
Again,
Yeah, so
again, I would say that we would interpret it to mean that since the amendment has been made, it would seem that for a period before that, it was intended to be accepted as an input credit.
yes, I think that Mitsubishi judgment of Supreme
Yes.
Unless
amendment in law
an
can be
amendment is only
seen to
clarification.
understand the.
Yes,
So-
I agree. Unless the amendment is only clarificatory. Now, I don't know whether this is what the provision for GST input credit says or not. But if it does not say that, then and if it is clarificatory and if it goes back and it is more onerous, then it is a retrospective change. So even that may not be acceptable.
So at this point, now that a lot of controversies are being resolved and are being put to an end, I go to Vishwajit. Vishwajit, there is talk of Vivad se Vishwas. So we are familiar, me and the other tax lawyers on the panel are familiar with the term Vivad se Vishwas because previously this scheme was brought in to settle the pending tax disputes. But now it seems that some scheme is being brought in to settle the pending dispute of MSMEs. Can you explain us what are the proposals with regard to this?
Thanks, Gagan sir. Actually, I must say that Daksha ma'am and Sandeep had quite good insights from tax perspective. So, insofar as this Vivad se Vishwas scheme is concerned, before that, I must say that the government, in terms of intent, in dealing with the problem of the large number of disputes that our courts are actually inundated with, it has shown a lot of intent and action that they are conscious about it and they are trying to find a solution to it. So from that perspective, in extending something similar to what was in there in Vivad se Vishwas scheme for tax, extending it to MSMEs, will also bring in, one, reduce the number of litigation pending in the courts, and two, also particularly to deal with bring in certainty. And I'll explain what exactly are the contours of this. So this is specifically in relation to the COVID period. It is quite apparent and well known that the MSMEs have been actually faced a lot of difficulty during the COVID period. And a lot of defaults were made by the COVID hit MSME entities. They could not execute a lot of contracts. So government, being conscious of it, had brought in certain changes to help them out. So first of all, that there were cases where performance security, which were actually because of default by the MSME entity, would have been forfeited by government entities. Now, what this budget has brought in that where that 95% of the performance security forfeited in such cases will be refunded. I'm sorry, there is some background noise because of some kind of construction work is going on, but hope I am otherwise audible.
Yes, you are perfectly audible.
Thank you. Now, second thing is, so this was in relation to performance security. The second one was is 95% of the bid security, which is the earnest money deposit if it is forfeited during the COVID period, which is the date has been defined, which is 19th February 2020 to 31st March 2022. That will also be refunded. Now, similarly, if liquidated damages had been deducted from such MSME entities, 95% of that will also be refunded. So this actually will go a long way, because in all these cases, almost everyone have challenged such orders and the issues are pending for arbitration or before various courts. So in a single stretch, what the government has brought in is a certainty that if you want 95%, you are if you are eligible, you just apply and this will be done. Now, this will reduce litigation, and the MSME entity will know that this is what is my actual refund, and I think people should jump at it and take 95% back. Similarly, it's not just about money. There were a lot of entities which were debarred because they could not perform during the COVID period. So even that has actually been revoked. So that also goes a long way to show that government is conscious of the difficulty being faced, and those things have been taken care of. However, it's been made clear that no interest will be paid on the refunded amount. And also further, actually, I think the government has rightly thought that once this is out, some entities may claim that, look, I was ignored for such a such period for different contracts because I was debarred during this period. Now, it's been made clear that those things will not be re-entertained, in the sense that whatever has happened has happened. The debarment is for future contracts. So overall, I feel that this is a very welcome step from the government perspective and from MSME entity also, because they are the hardest hit sector in terms of because of COVID, and it will go on a long way in helping both the MSMEs entities generally and reducing the burden of courts specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Vishwajit. Talking about MSME, I think there's another major amendment which probably has gone unnoticed, is the amendment in section 43B. Dakshaji, can you please throw some light on that amendment in 43B and how MSMEs are likely to be benefited from that?
Yes. What happens is that when entities are making payments to MSMEs, then most corporates and most businesses function on accruals basis. So if the payment to be made to MSME is on an accruals basis, taken as a deduction by the payer to the MSME, then they would get a deduction. However, the MSME has not received that payment. In general, there is a provision that they should be made the payment within 45 days. Or there are certain situations, I mean, they can have contractual arrangement whereby the number of days can be reduced or increased. Now, despite this being the situation contractually or under the law, the payer invariably or a lot of times failed to make the payment on time to the MSME. Now, this caused a lot of difficulty to the MSME because they are always short of working capital. That is one of the reasons why this kind of limitation was put. But since there was no penal provision for the payer to make the payment in time, the payer was not really kind of, instigated to make the payment. There was nothing for him to lose if he didn't make the payment on time. But so in order to rectify that situation, what the government has said now is, or what the tax department has brought in now, is that despite the fact that the payer does accruals accounting in terms of, its profit and loss account, if that entity has not made the payment within the time limit specified by statute of the MSME laws statute or the contract, then they will not get deduction for that amount. They will get the deduction only in the year in which they make the payment to the MSME. This sort of, puts the payer in a docs, as it were, to say that, okay, now I'm going to have to make sure that I make the payment within the time period that is specified. And it gives benefit to the MSME that they receive the payment in time so their cash flows can be managed better. So in that sense, it is a beneficial provision for MSMEs and kind of streamlines.
Just one clarification on this provision, which I wanted to understand from you, is that the proviso does not apply. So even if the payment is made before the due date of filing of income tax return, it would still be disallowed. But does that also mean that if the expense is booked on 31st March, does that window of 45 days, which is available under MSME Act, would apply, or even that would be disallowed?
That would be disallowed as well, because it says strictly on cash basis.
Okay. So basically, if I'm an MSME, then my billing is practically on cash basis as far as the month of March is concerned.
No, if you're a payer, your deduction is strictly on cash basis. MSME may be working on cash basis or may not be, depending on what kind of structure they are. If they are individuals, they are permitted to be, on cash basis. But if they are companies, then they have to do it on an accruals basis. That is the law. But even if they were to account for that income, if they haven't received, they are being taxed on an income which they have not received. So it was a kind of double whammy. Not only did they have cash crunch because the money was not received, they were being taxed on something which actually did not get realized as their income. So from that perspective, it is it sort of cleans up that situation quite a bit.
So the young professionals who are joining profession, young graduates who are joining profession either as a chartered accountant or as a lawyer, I think they should get themselves registered as MSME, so their cash flow will not be an issue.
Well, I don't know whether that would qualify as MSME or not, because I'm not an MSME expert, but if it does, yes, what you are saying is right.
Yes. Now at this point, there's new concept, which not new concept, a new area which has been being debated in newspaper lately, and this is a question to you as well as Sandeep on online gaming as well as to Bishwajit. Online gaming, are there any regulatory laws in place, Bishwajit, at this stage?
Okay. So insofar as the regulation of online gaming is concerned, now some of the states have come up with regulations which intends to prohibit wagering or games which are game of chance. But there is no, obviously these provisions have been challenged in courts, and insofar as these bans are blanket bans, including game of skills, the courts have pushed down these provisions, saying that either they are arbitrary or they does not have rational nexus to what it intends to achieve. Now, insofar as the central government is concerned, it is deliberating regulations under the IT Act to regulate all kind of games insofar as those games are games of skill involving money and not game of chance. And the idea is that all such games which are played for money and they declare themselves to be game of skills would have to make a self-declaration before a self-regulatory body, SRO, which is called, and that SRO would allow these games to exist. Obviously, insofar as gaming companies are concerned, they have their own challenges But insofar this online gaming as a profession has become, a very popular profession. This is something which maybe people of our generation do not realize that, but today a lot of youngsters are making money in online games, and not making like 5,000 or 10,000 rupees. They are making 60 lakh, 1 crore rupees a year just by playing these games. And their
यही सीख
taxability.
लेते हैं.
Sorry?
Sorry, I was on a lighter note. I was saying यही सीख लेते हैं.
Sir, not a bad option. So the question has always been, before this budget, there were two, three critical questions that arose with respect to taxability of the gamers. I am not talking about the gaming companies right now. One obviously is that how did the TDS work for them, whether the winnings were allowed to be set off from the losses before the gaming companies were to determine the TDS. The second was whether the losses that these gamers incur, in case they have net losses, whether these losses can be carried forward or not. And third was, what is the nature of income, because there is still a lot of the younger generation who is now reading the law for the first time because they are making money, saying if what Virat Kohli earns from playing cricket is income from business and profession, then what if I am playing FIFA online, then my income should also be income from business or profession, because that is what my profession is. Why is it an income from other sources? So these were the issues. I understand some of them have been addressed, and I'll leave it for you, Gagan sir and Daksha ma'am, to explain to audience what all changes have come in and how it will impact the gamers.
So if I can just come in here I must admit that I am not a person who understands the gaming business as yet. I have yet to learn. But what I also understood from a youngster recently is that this gaming activity is not only just chance and all of that skill, but that skill is also used to make investments. Now, I don't know exactly how all of this will be treated, but it would be very good if the gaming activity is defined after taking into consideration a lot of the gaming models which are out now. So because at the moment, what it is saying is that there could be gaming activities which are done, and there are gains which are made out in certain games, and there are losses which are made in certain games, and those losses are to be netted off, and whatever remains from that, whatever the person withdraws is going to be taxed at 30%. Now, just what Sandeep was mentioning, that the person can say, who's making, more than 1 crore rupees or 60-70 lakhs of rupees of income out of the gaming activity, he can say that this is my business. But the point that at the moment, the law is not recognizing a gaming activity as a business activity. Very, very similar to something which is like a teaching activity. Is teaching activity recognized as a business activity, despite the fact that now there is a lot of teaching activity which is done on the scale of business? So this is the kind of situation which we are in, that despite the fact that gaming may be treated, and because it is not only game of chance, but it is also game of skills. Gaming may be treated as a business activity. Until that happens, expenses incurred for that will not be allowed, though losses have been brought in. So losses and gains are being netted off. But of course, the method of sort of computing the losses and gains is, I mean, how it should be set off is going to be prescribed. So we will have to wait and watch how it is done. But when that happens, then whatever is withdrawn from the gaming account or by the user is going to be subjected to 30% of withholding tax. Now, another thing which is causing a little bit of an issue of how it will practically pan out is when the winning is in kind, not in cash. So one is the valuation of that winning in kind, and second, because 30% has to be withheld by the person who is giving that winning, there is no cash. Where and how that cash will be received by that person, and obviously it will have to be received from the person who has won the gaming activity in kind. So how will that payment made by the winner to the gaming intermediary be treated in the hands of the gaming intermediary? So these are some of the issues which need to be sort of, looked into much more thoroughly to come up with a whole sort of, set of provisions for this industry, knowing that this industry is really catching the imagination of a huge number of youngsters.
Yeah. So having said that, I think one important point which is to be noted is that unlike crypto, this is taxable on net winning basis. So it is not an absolute discouragement by the government the way it is for crypto or virtual digital asset as it is worded in the act. So and you rightly said that gaming industry is something which government is keenly promoting and encouraging youngsters to develop those games in India. And I think in times to come, the challenges would be there with regard to how the TDS provisions would be enforced if the gaming intermediary is located outside India. Will he submit to the jurisdiction of Indian tax authorities or not? Now,
Very
is there,
similar, very similar to the equalization levy levied on e-commerce operators who are facilitators and are located outside India. So yeah, this is going to be very similar to that.
And one other important aspect which maybe Gagan sir, you can throw some light is that despite agreeing that the taxability of such income should be on net basis, there is still no provision with respect to carry forward of the losses insofar as the income from winnings of the online games are concerned. So that will continue to remain a big issue because a game like poker, where you may lose a big amount on 31st of March and win again on 1st of April, if carry forward of losses is not allowed, that may have a major impact, especially when the winnings of horse racing are allowed or losses of horse racing are allowed to be carried forward, but the losses of online gaming is not allowed.
That's exactly why I say that the whole gaming industry needs to be understood far better. And now if government is promoting the gaming industry, then they also need to sort of, dissect it down and divide it up into the various types of gaming activities which are there, and what is reasonable in terms of that. And just to connect it with cryptocurrency, crypto is not liked for a simple reason that it does not have any basis for valuing that currency, and it's simply like something bubble in the air, and that is what the government is not comfortable with. But here it is not like that. Here it is an activity which is using the skill of the where the skill of the person who is engaged in the gaming in games is being used, and therefore it is a reward for that person's skill as such, if you break it down like that. So yeah, a lot needs to be done here.
So I go back to Vishwajit.
We can't hear you, Gagan.
There was a reference of ease of doing business budget, which we should look at, which we might. Hello.
You'll have to repeat yourself because we couldn't hear you.
Okay. This question was to Vishwajit that in terms of ease of doing business, are there any budget proposals which we might have missed? And because one aspect which I remember from the speech of Finance Minister that close to 39,000 compliances were other proposals in the budget document, Vishwajit, which you got a chance to look at in terms of suggesting ease of doing business?
Not exactly on the lines that you suggested, but in terms of, again, disputes, I would say there is one very interesting aspect, which is we all know that government and government entities are the biggest litigators in our country. And at times we would have all in our experience interacted with some government official who would say that we know that we don't have a good case, but then who takes a decision that we can settle this dispute or we can withdraw these proceedings from the court. And so therefore, for various reasons, no one in the government setup really takes a decision that, okay, this can be settled or this can be withdrawn from the courts. In this budget, this is something that is very interesting thing that has been proposed. And this is something that I am particularly very enthused about, because on a lot of occasions, just because dispute resolution takes so long in India, that even if there is an arbitration clause and there is an arbitration award, first of all, the arbitration itself takes a long time to be resolved. Thereafter, even if that private party or the government party, whichever party has a award in their favor, that matter is taken to court and then it travels up to the Supreme Court, be it a smaller matter, be it a bigger matter, whatever the value of that matter is. And everyone in the process suffers. There is always an element of uncertainty as to what will be the final outcome, what will the Supreme Court decide, and of course, the time that it takes. And therefore, again, we have been called to be a not so business friendly regime. So something specific and interesting that they have come up with is that it now will allow the government and government undertakings to settle contractual disputes where the arbitral award is under challenge in a court, where there is I mean, of course, we are waiting for the details, but there will be standardized terms and there will be a voluntary settlement scheme. Now, again, depending on what the details are, but fact remains that if there is a standardized term set up basis which a government official can take a decision that, look, this is an award in our favor or this is an award against us, we would want to settle this. And if the parties are agreeable, it can be settled. And therefore, it will bring an end to a litigation which would have continued for 4, 5, 6 years. So not only is it helpful for the private entity who is more likely to have an award in their favor, the government will withdraw it. And then it also becomes easier for the government official because he would not be blamed for taking a decision to settle, because there is a standard term available to him and no one will question his decision that you may have taken this decision for some extraneous consideration. It's a huge issue that we see, because even if they genuinely feel that this need not be challenged, but because they are worried about the later implications, some investigation by some agency or the other, they are not able to take that decision. So this, I think, will go a long way in increasing the faith of the private parties in submitting tenders. And then ultimately, even if there is a dispute, they would know that even if I have an award in my favor, it will take years to be finally decided. So I think it's something that's a good beginning, and not just for future, even for present. I don't have the numbers, but I am very, very sure that there will be thousands
of crores
disputes with valuation of maybe thousands or lakhs of crores of money that is stuck
Absolutely.
will actually be released if this is implemented. So I'm very, very happy with this development.
Yeah, I was part of one of the international arbitration where I learned that the cost of litigation has far exceeded the amount involved, but no officer was willing to take a call because of the obvious reasons, and therefore this matter went on. One last question to Sandeep now. And Sandeep, the general impression is that a lot of custom duties have been reduced. Can you throw some light on it, that what were the products on which custom duties were reduced, and why do you think it's good for India?
Uh, okay, so first of all, I would say that it is not that only custom duties have been reduced. I would say that in terms of a policy perspective, that India has to become self-sustained and has to have a growth where most of the products are manufactured in India. The tinkering in custom duty is in line with that policy. Now, obviously, that means the custom duty on the finished product has been increased and the custom duty on the raw materials have been decreased, which will ensure that there is an impetus to domestic manufacturing of the product. Now, say for instance, if you talk about uh, automobiles, vehicles, when they are bought into India in a semi-knockdown condition, that means they are manufactured somewhere else, they are opened into some 5, 7, 10 parts, so they are knocked down and then they are bought into India, custom duty has gone up. Other vehicles completely knocked down, vehicle completely built up vehicle, custom duty has gone up. Whereas if you see parts of aircraft, etc., custom duty has come down. Parts of mobile, all parts of mobile, whether they are camera lenses, whether they are battery related, etc., the custom duties have come down. A lot of agricultural product you will see that which are either as part of manufacturing process as raw materials. Say for instance, ethyl alcohol, which is used by chemical industry, the custom duties have come down. So I would say that obviously there has been a lot of drinking in hundreds of products, but the underlying policy is to ensure that there is an impetus on domestic manufacturing. And with that idea in mind, the finished goods which were being imported into India till now, the custom duties have been increased on that. And on the same time, the raw materials which are required for manufacturing those goods or some other goods which are as of now not being manufactured in India, those their duties have been reduced.
Thanks, Sandeep. I think overall the reading of budget is that it's very inclusive and has addressed or taken care of interest of practically every segment of the society. And one important segment, and which I consider is the highlight of the budget, was to create a fund to support poor under trials who can't afford bail. So the honorable president had pointed out this in one of the conference where Chief Justice was also there, that if we are really growing, why we would need more jails? The need for jails should actually come down. And one of the reason for the huge number of under trials still in jail was that they couldn't afford their bail amount. So on that note, I thank all three of you to spare your time and speak on the issues of budget which have not been discussed generally in various conferences, though we were technical on few aspects, but considering that it's a lawyers forum, is fairly acceptable. Any questions? If there are any questions from the audience, Madhura, are there any questions?
No, so nothing in the chat box. So to our audience, if anyone has any question, you may unmute yourself and ask it to any of the panelists. Anyone has a question? We'll wait for maybe 15 seconds more. So the recording of this event will be available on ILA website and the YouTube channel. If anyone has to comment on anything or wants to reach out to our speakers, they may reach out to ILA on that and we'll be happy to facilitate.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Madhura. You can stop recording.
Sure, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daksha.